Good evening, and welcome to Equity Library Theater's production of selections from Edgar Lee Masters' classic Spoon River Anthology. Yep, that's a graveyard that's behind me, and it's home to many of the residents of the mythical town of Spoon River, located somewhere in America's Midwest. Here lie rogues and scholars, adulterers, politicians, ministers, suicides and war heroes, scarlet women, do-gooders, and even folk who took their grudges with them beyond the grave. You're going to meet some of them tonight. Masters wrote Spoon River Anthology in 1915. Remember, Abraham Lincoln was still a vivid memory for some, having died only 50 years before. Automobiles were novelties, and women still had not yet achieved the vote. Our world has changed in the 106 years since Spoon River was published. But the characters that you will meet tonight, my friends and neighbors, are timeless. As a courtesy to the other audience members and to the players, we're going to ask you to please turn off your microphones and your cameras. And we're also going to ask that you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Louise Smith.
Herbert, he broke our engagement of 8 years. When Annabelle returned to the village from the seminary, me. If I had let me love for him alone, it might have grown into a beautiful sorrow. Who knows? Filling my life with healing fragrance. But I tortured it. I poisoned it. I blinded its eyes and it became hatred. Deadly ivy instead of clematis. And my soul fell from its support. Oh, its tendrils tangled in decay. Do not let the gardener play gardener with your soul. Unless you are sure it is wiser than your soul's nature.
Our next guest is Archibald Higbee.
I loathe you, Spoon River. I tried to rise above you. I was ashamed of you. I despised you as the place of my nativity. And there in Rome, among the artists speaking Italian, speaking French, I seemed to myself at times to be free of every trace of my origin. I seemed to be reaching the heights of art and to breathe the air the masters breathe and to see the world with their eyes. But still, they'd pass my work and say, "What are you driving at, my friend? Sometimes the face looks like Apollo's. At others, it has a trace of Lincoln's." There was no culture, you know, in Spoon River. And I burned with shame and I held my peace. And what could I do? All covered over and weighted down with Western soil, except aspire and pray for another birth in the world with all of Spoon River rooted out of my soul.
I'd like to present to you Dr. Siegfried Eisenman,
I said to myself, when they handed me my diploma, I said to myself, I will be good and wise and brave and helpful to others. I said I will carry the Christian creed into the practice of medicine. Somehow the world and the other doctors know what's in your heart as soon as you make this high-souled resolution. And the way of it is, they starve you out, and no one comes to you but the poor. And you find too late that being a doctor is just a way of making a living. And when you are poor and have to carry the Christian creed and wife and children all on your back, it is too much. That's why I made the elixir of youth, which landed me in the jail at Peoria, branded a swindler and a crook by the upright federal judge.
And here's my good friend, Margaret Fuller Slack.
I would have been as great as George Eliot, but for an untoward fate. For look at the photograph of me made by Pennewitt, chin resting on hand and deep-set eyes, gray too and far-searching. But there was the old problem. Should it be celibacy, matrimony, or unchastity? Then John Slack, the rich druggist, wooed me, luring me with the promise of leisure for my novel. And I married him, giving birth to 8 children, and had no time to write. It was all over with me anyway when I ran the needle in my hand while washing the baby's things and died from lockjaw. An ironical death. Hear me, ambitious souls. Sex is the curse of life.
And I'd like to introduce you next to dear Lucinda Matlock.
I went to the dances at Chandlerville and played Snap Out at Winchester. One time we changed partners, driving home in the moonlight of middle June. And then I found Davis. We were married, lived together for 70 years, enjoying, working, raising 12 children, 8 of whom we lost ere I had reached the age of 60. I spun, I wove, I kept the house, I nursed the sick, I made the garden, and for holiday rambled over the fields where sang the larks, and by Spoon River, gathering many a shell, many a flower and medicinal weed, shouting to the wooded hills, singing to the green valleys. At 96, I had lived enough, that is all, and passed to a sweet repose. What is this I hear of sorrow and weariness, anger, discontent, drooping hopes? Degenerate sons and daughters, life is too strong for you. It takes life to love life.
And here's my neighbor, Hannah Armstrong.
You know, I wrote him a letter asking him, for old time's sake, to discharge my sick boy from the army. Well, maybe he couldn't read it. But then I went to town and I had James Garber, who wrote beautifully. I had him write him a letter, but maybe it was lost in the mail. So I traveled to Washington, D.C., and I was more than an hour finding the White House. And when I found it, they turned me away, hiding their smiles. And then I thought, oh, well, he ain't the same as when I boarded him, and he and my husband worked together, and all of us called him Abe there in Menard. As a last attempt, I turned to a guard and I said, please, tell him it's old Aunt Hannah from Illinois. Come to see him about her sick boy in the army. Well, just in a moment they let me in, and he dropped his business as president and wrote in his own hand Doug's discharge. Oh, talking all the while of the early days and telling stories.
And now I'd like to introduce you to Oscar Hummel.
I staggered on through darkness. It's a hazy sky and a few stars, which I followed as best I could. See, it was 9 o'clock, and I was trying to find my way home, but somehow I was lost, though really keeping the road. Then I reeled through a gate and into a yard, and I called out at the top of my voice, "Oh, fiddler, oh, Mr. Jones." You see, I thought it was his house, and he'd show me the way home. But who should step out but A.D. Blood in his nightshirt and a stick of wood, and he's roaring about the cursed saloons and the criminals they made. "You drunken? Oscar Hummel," he said, as I stood there to and fro, taking the blows from the stick in his hand, till I dropped down dead at his feet.
And now I'd like you to meet Nancy Knapp.
Well, don't you see, this was the way of it. We bought the farm with what he inherited, and his brothers and sisters accused him of poisoning his father's mind against the rest of them. And we never had any peace with our treasure. The Murrin took the cattle, and the crops failed, and lightning struck the granary. So we mortgaged the farm to keep going. And he grew silent and was worried all the time. Then some of the neighbors turned against us and took sides with his brothers and sisters, and I had no place to turn. And some may say at an earlier time in life, no matter, so-and-so is my friend, or I can shake this off with a little trip to Decatur. Then the dreadfulest of smells infested the rooms. So I set fire to the beds, and the old witch house, it went up in a roar of flame as I danced in the yard, waving my arms, while he wept like a freezing steer.
And here is dear Nellie Clark.
I was only 8 years old, And before I grew up and knew what it meant, I had no words for it, except that I was frightened and told my mother and that my father got a pistol and would have killed Charlie, who was a big boy, 15 years old, except for his mother. Nevertheless, the story clung to me. But the man who married me, a widower of 35, was a newcomer and never heard it till 2 years after we were married. Then he considered himself cheated. And the village agreed that I was not really a virgin. Well, he deserted me, and I died the following winter.
Please welcome my neighbor, Daisy Fraser.
Did you ever hear of Editor Whedon giving to the public treasury any of the money he received for supporting candidates for office? Or for writing up the canning factory to get people to invest? Or for suppressing the facts about the bank when it was rotten and ready to break? Did you ever hear of the circuit judge helping anyone except the Q Railroad or the bankers? Or did Reverend Pete or Reverend Sibley give any part of their salary, earned by keeping still, or speaking out as the leaders wished them to do, to the building of the waterworks? But I, Daisy Fraser, who always passed along the streets, the rows of nods and smiles and coughs and words such as, "There she goes," never was taken before Justice Arnett without contributing $10 in costs to the school fund of Spoon River.
And here's my dear friend, Anna Clute.
Over and over, they used to ask me while buying the wine or the beer in Peoria first and later in Chicago, Denver, Frisco, New York, wherever I lived, how I happened to lead the life and what was the start of it. Well, I told them a silk dress and a promise of marriage from a rich man. It was Lucius Atherton. But that was not really it at all. Suppose a boy steals an apple from a cart in the grocery store, and they all begin to call him a thief. The editor, minister, judge, and all the people. A thief, a thief, a thief, wherever he goes. And he can't get work. And he can't get bread without stealing it. Why, the boy will steal. It's the way the people regard the theft of the apple that makes the boy what he is.
You've heard my neighbor's tales. I'm Pauline Barrett, and you will hear my story. Almost the shell of a woman after the surgeon's knife and almost a year to climb back into my strength until the dawn of our wedding decennial found me my seeming self again. We walked the forest together by a path of soft moss and turf. But I could not look in your eyes, and you could not look in mine, for such sorrow was ours, the beginning of gray in your hair, and I but a shell of myself. And what did we speak of? Sky, sea, anything most to hide our thoughts. And then your gift of wild roses set upon the table to grace our dinner. Poor heart, how bravely you struggled to live a remembered rhapsody. My spirits drooped as night came forth, and you left me alone in my room for a while, as you did when I was a bride, poor heart. And I looked in the mirror, and something said, one should be all dead when one is half dead, nor ever mock life, nor ever cheat love. And I did it looking there in the mirror. Dear, have you ever understood?
Thank you all for coming, and good night, everyone.